when I first saw your work, I really thought about how you pay attention to time and to slowness and to certain processes that are beyond our control. And I wonder if you could say something about this specific scene where it was filmed. It was a very special moment.
This specific movie, esse filme.
Well, this movie specifically, I was on vacation in Bahia, and of the landscape there, there's a particularity. There are many fallacies which look as if they are solid, but they're made of clay. I don't know if you could see, but the entire cliff started to move very slowly. And I felt an insight beyond that cliff that was moving. You could see that there is not much that we can do out of life beyond just contemplate, just observe the world. Sometime later, I was walking in Rome, in the Palatine ruins, where there is the Temple of Kronos. And I was also in shock there before the few columns that are still left, because that even time is ruined. And even before these thoughts arising in my mind, I was already working somehow with this idea, this entropic idea of ruinification and accepting this and observing the beauty that there is in it, in this ruin, in the make in which we belong. Ruinificação. O que é ruinificação? If I known, I wouldn't do art. I would give speeches. I don't know. Well, it's the passing of time, it's the briefness of life.
And so in this work,
então, nesse trabalho, você segurou uma câmera na frente, observando essa transformação que a paisagem estava passando e capturou um momento que raramente a gente observa, algo que frequentemente, de alguma maneira, escapa a nossa visão e até a nossa paciência.
É teste de paciência.
Yeah, it is a test of patience. It's a true test of patience. Thank you for that. There is beauty in that for you to stop and pay attention. We are very distracted in our everyday life. This is how we live.
I remember that the very first work of yours I saw was at the Park Lage in Rio, and you had hung a linen cloth from the ceiling of a former chapel. And you had, I think, added iron particles to the cloth.
Salt.
Mm-hmm. And they were slowly transforming over the duration of the exhibition.
Yeah, it was changing because of the humidity of the forest around the parquelage. I prepared the canvas with iron powder and salty water. So it was responding to the variations of humidity in the air. And the painting was moving slowly, but it was moving and getting more rusty, so the colors were also changing. I always had, since I was a young student in the school, tried to make a landscape. It's not a form. It's more, for me, it's more movement than a form, than a shape. So I tried to respond that the works, in a way, mirrorize the time. Estou falando em inglês, desculpa. Os trabalhos sejam, de certa forma, espelhos do tempo e dessa fluidez que, para mim, é muito mais importante do que as formas são sempre passageiras. A gente que tem uma vida muito breve, a gente não consegue ver as montanhas se movendo tal qual as nuvens se movem. Se a gente vivesse mais, a gente ia perceber que até as montanhas são líquidas.
It's interesting when you perceive these works, because in a way, if you just go once and look at it for the duration that you normally look at works, 3 minutes, for example, in a museum, what you perceive is actually not the work in this case. It is a bit like video or moving image or performance in which you need to really see and pay attention for a longer period of time to actually get a sense of what the work is. So I saw the piece actually twice on 2 different days. And even in that period of time, there were small changes that I thought, at least I perceived. Then again, you never know.
We also change during this interval, so it's not the same river or the same man, like Heraclitus says. So we change also. And perhaps we project our change. When we see a movie the second time, we see a different movie, in a way.
In other works, you have used salt, crystals, salt, cristais de sal.
Yes, we use salt in many works.
Yeah, so you use these different elements and actually rely somewhat on their specific attitudes or behaviors, if you want to use more of an anthropomorphic language. Can you say something about your, what I would call collaboration with iron particles or salt and so on?
Yeah, all these elements are not passive. They have their behave, they have the chemical. You kind of know how they behave, but it's also let it happen. And if it doesn't work, throw it out, do it again. But let the iron be iron, not to pretend that it's something else, or the salt be salty, not sweet, for example. But let the things be themselves.
Does all of this have anything to do with you with some references that we've been actually discussing? But could you maybe say something about entropy and your relation to land art and to artists like Smithson, who have left the gallery space behind and really experimented in a way with natural processes and paid attention to these different time scales actually that exceed human time?
There is maybe my favorite myth. It's not that short, so I'm going to just talk about the end of it, but it's quite emblematic. Models of temporality. The hero, after a series of happenings, mythical happenings, he has to go back home. And the jaguar tells him that he's going to hear 3 callings on his path back home. The call from the rock, the call from the wood, and the sweet call from the rotten wood. And he would not be able to answer the sweet call from the rotten wood. And on his way back, he distracts himself and he answers this call. And then he meets an ogre. He has this encounter, almost dies during the fight, but at the end he reaches his village. But ever since that moment, we have a very brief time life because he answered the call from the rotten wood. If he hadn't answered that call, we would have a longer life, such as do the trees, for example. So I believe we come from a false promise that art survives beyond the artist. But not even the sun is infinite. The sun will die one day. It will end. Everything will end someday. But other things will exist. But we still sell this false promise, this Peter Pan complex somehow that thinks that we will continue young forever, that we'll never grow old. And I think there is beauty in this dying. And the entropy somehow talks about this.
Could you speak about
Você poderia falar sobre o projeto que você começou recentemente no Rio, ou ao redor do Rio? Eu acho que se relaciona bem com isso.
Apesar de eu ter relativo sucesso,
although I have a relative success, I live off of my work, I run exhibitions and so on, I can't find an environment. For me, it's not a criticism to the Bienal Foundation. I think this environment is horrible. I think the environment outside is much nicer, enjoyable under a tree than any type of building that's made of concrete and glass, that's lacking any type of physical meaning. I can't find an environment in general for my work, for a good part of my work at least. So I understood that I should create this environment and not wait for it to be given to me, that somebody would invite me to do whatever I want, however I want. So I thought that I would have to create an environment for my work, and I've never been happier in my life. And I work with liberty, I'm working with work that don't need to be accepted, so they can rot the way they want. But this is something that's beginning to happen now, and maybe next year I'll be able to talk better about this project. I've been working on it only for 6 months, no, actually 20 years, but now 6 months that I've been objectively working on this, that I moved to this terrain on top of a mountain in the middle of a forest, and I'm building a series of sculptures, and I live there also. I plant most of what I eat. It's a small tribe that I'm creating there somehow, but it's still under construction. I can't really be too assertive with regards to that space, but soon enough I will be able to talk about it with more property.
So what is your ideal plan? You know, you've been working on it for such a long time, and you started it now some months ago. So how do you see it developing? What would be your ideal sort of outcome of this place, somewhere outside in nature where works can take a different form, where they can stay for a durational period of time?
I don't have a very specific time. I don't want to be stuck to a very specific talk about this, because maybe my work will last 100 years, maybe a week. And I'm not thinking too much about establishing rules, but thinking that I could maybe exert or work on many different types of temporalities. Could be something that works for one day and things that may take 10, 15, 20 years. But this is of the nature of the work itself. If it's a performance, it will last 20 minutes. If it's a sculpture, it may last 200 years. So, but I think it's nice to have these different temporalities in the same environment. And it's in the middle of a forest, so there are birds, snakes, lizards, monkeys. There's a sculpture that's a boat full of water, and there were many mosquitoes inside this boat. And so I put fish to eat the larvae, and then the birds started eating the fish. And so things start transforming and going to a line of events, a sequence of events that don't belong to my gesture anymore. And this continuous line, that seems to me to be one of the most beautiful things, because it's a place where there is no separation between nature and culture. It's not a place where the culture events go. It's somewhere where it's not that there are simultaneous events. It's just that it's not that they go together. It's that they are totally simultaneous. They're the same.
Or some sort of residue with processes that take place independently, and of course that also somehow, blurs the boundaries of what is human-made or could be considered culture and what is natural.
Essa ideia é uma ideia muito equivocada.
This is a very wrong idea that we have, that what's human and what's natural. I think that this is actually stupidity. Human is so narcissistic that they think they're in the center of the world and everything else is inferior. And everything has to be the way we want and the way we wish. But we actually belong to an evolutionary line that comes from the bacteria. And we do not live without all these guys out there. There's a very interesting guy that I had the pleasure of meeting the year before last one called Charles Clement, who is a biologist, and he lives in Amazonia, and all his work was to prove that the forest, there were much more people than we believed, and the part that is inhabited is much more biodiverse than the one that's virgin. So not necessarily our relationship with the environment, with what surrounds us will be predatory. In the case of the Amazon forest, which is huge, the humans there, that type of human specifically that was there, can potentialize the environment. So there are much more species than in the virgin forest. So I prefer not to separate us from the rest of the world.
You already spoke a bit about your ideas about art, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on attention and what role attention plays for you in your practice, perhaps, or in in the work that you create, but perhaps also in your everyday life, in the studio or outside.
Sem atenção, a gente não.
Well, without attention, I'm a bit retarded. I can't do too many things at the same time. Or concentration, attention, it's when you are able to transmit or you receive something from what you are contemplating, or when you are acting, or you animate an object in which you're working on the screen or somewhere else. And I think an important role of the attention outside, when you are outside of your environment, outside of your house, is that you can see 1,000 different things that usually you don't notice. It's essential to have attention in whatever it is that you're doing, in things that are happening around you, because things happening around you are just full of beauty.
Our next speaker later this afternoon is Ivone Guevara, and she will also speak about our attention to ecological questions and what we refer to as nature, and how perhaps, I mean, this is not, I guess, what she will say, but in my view, relating to your work, the kind of desynchronization of different times is what is somehow causing our lack of attention to the environment and our actual exerting all of these violences upon nature. So I think that, this gap in between, or this desynchronization between human time and planetary time or geological time and so on is maybe something where we need to look closer into.
eu não acho que tenha muita diferença.
I don't
Acho que a
think
gente
there's a
fica
lot
muito
of difference,
apressado,
actually. I think
tem que acelerar
sometimes
as
we're in a
coisas. Porque
hurry trying to
a gente
accelerate
não é
things. But
o humano não é um fenômeno
humans are not a
paralelo
parallel phenomena
ao
to
resto do cosmos.
the rest of the
A gente está
cosmos.
super...
We are
ano de vida é uma volta
super.
da Terra ao
1
Sol.
year of life is one cycle of the planet around
Definitivamente
the sun, and 1 day is one turn on its own axis.
ciclos,
So we are going around with these cosmic cycles. We're moving with them. But because we wanted an environment like this one that's closed,
meio fora do mundo, quando se
maybe
controla a
out of the
temperatura,
world when you can control
etc.,
temperature and light and so on and so
acaba
forth,
deixando
we end up
de perceber um
not
descompasso, né?
noticing,
Não acho
creating
que a gente esteja
a world that's out of pace. But I don't think that we are in a parallel world.
distante, né? Mas a gente não
Although
consegue
we
escapar
try
desse
to, we can't escape, and we
esse
cannot
descompasso
create a
é
parallel world. And this encompassed
você fica fora de sync, né?
situation, it means that you're just out of sync from
Não é legal.
everything else, and that's not good.
Yeah, I think that, this is well, we talked a lot about the political aspects of attention over the last few days. And I really think that, there are many things that we need to pay attention to, amongst others, that we see ourselves very often as outside. And so maybe we need to reconsider our own relationship to our surroundings, nature, etc. I would suggest that we take a short break before we continue with Ivone Guevara. If you can try to be back here at 5 past, the latest 10 past 4, so we can continue. And we'll try to solve the sound problems in the meantime, because I think it's pretty hard to understand. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Thiago.
Thank you.